In this video, we're going to disassemble a Boss Micro BR-80. This is the second generation of the Micro BR, the one that has a scrolling wheel. And in most cases, you're probably here so that you can repair or replace your scrolling wheel, which often malfunctions in a few different ways. One is, like this unit, it gets very difficult to turn. On some other units, it may start getting crazy when you turn it. It'll go up, it'll go down, it won't really respond the way you want. On this particular Boss BR-80, I'm planning to clean the contacts so that I hopefully can make this wheel scroll a little easier. Oftentimes the contacts get dirty on the inside and you can clean them off fairly simply, but disassembling the unit is somewhat daunting, although I think most people can do it if they take their time. So let's get to it. The first thing you're going to need to do in order to disassemble the unit is remove the 4 screws on each side of the unit. Here, 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 and here. On the other side, they're located in the exact same position. Here, 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 and here. I've already removed them to save time, but that's the extent of my disassembly so far. Once you've done that, you'll be able to separate the top and bottom metal coverings, not the actual unit, just the metal coverings. This is these metal coverings are to make the unit more durable, and as you can see, they have to slide in a certain way. See how they have a little slot on the top and the bottom? This is very important to note when you reassemble them. On this side, there's a tab. Because of the placement of the screw, there has to be a tab there, and that has to slide in as well when you reassemble it, as do the edges. The same thing's true of the bottom half. Once we take the top covering off, you'll see that you don't really get that much further into the unit. However, it is necessary to get further into the unit, as you will see when we take off the bottom half, or covering, I should say. Again, see how the metal covering has slots and has to be slid into these slots in order to be reassembled correctly. It's important to note that and to keep it in mind on the reassembly process. Okay, now that we've removed the bottom plate, you can see that there are a number of screws that we'll have to remove. So here's a diagram showing the 7 screws that we can remove to take the unit apart. The red ones are all necessary in order to separate the top and bottom halves. The blue indicates the screw holding the scroll wheel on. You can actually skip that one if you'd like for now. However, you're going to need to do it anyway, so it's a good idea to remove that one as well. In the interest of saving time, I'm going to skip past the removal of these screws. I'm going to remove all 7 in the next section. So you might want to pause the video here and remove all these screws, and do keep them separate from the other screws, as these are a different size. There are only 2 different size screws on this unit. All of these will be slightly longer. The 8 screws on the sides are slightly shorter, and you should keep them separate because you don't want to confuse the 2. Once you've removed all the screws, you'll be able to separate the top and bottom halves. Be careful of the battery springs. Also, when you remove the upper and lower halves, you'll find the 2 side panels will just sort of fall off. They're held in place by the upper and lower halves. As you can see, one's right here, and they have little tabs on the top and bottom that allow you to slide them in. And it's important to remember on reassembly to put these back in prior to putting the 2 halves together. And I will cover that again on the reassembly section of this video. So now that we have all the screws removed, I'm going to separate the 2 halves, again being careful of the battery springs. And as you can see, it's just the back, pretty straightforward. It comes off nice and clean. You don't need to remove any of the feet either, so don't bother doing that. It's just a waste of time. Now here's the back. There's only a couple of screws that we need to worry about, actually 4 total. The unit's still pretty much self-contained once you take off the back panel. You can remove this little switch here, the plastic on this switch, if need be. You can also leave it on. It's important to remember when you take it off to put it back on before you reassemble the unit. It's also important to notice that when you remove the back panel or when you remove the side, at one of those points, this little metal tab is going to fall out. And on the reassembly process, I will show you how to reinsert that. It's not complicated, but it isn't very obvious. For now, just keep it aside with your screws, and we'll go over how to reinsert it on the reassembly process. Okay, now that we've removed the back panel, we need to remove the two screws holding the main board on. The first one is located here and is actually labeled B on the main board, and the other one, as you would imagine, is right here and is labeled A on the main board. Pretty straightforward. Next, we're going to remove the plug connecting to the guitar input daughter board. This is not completely required. You could leave it plugged in and have it hanging off to the side while you're working. I'm going to unplug it so I can get it out of the way. Next, we need to remove the two screws holding the daughter board onto the front cover. So we'll do that now. And now we can just remove the daughter board and put it off to the side. Once the daughter board is removed, we simply need to flip the unit over and it should just come right out. Now remember, the screen is still attached to the main board, not to the front cover, so be careful of that when you're flipping this over. So it's best to hold it, invert it, and then lift the top cover off. Notice that the scroll wheel comes off with it because we removed the screw earlier. Now we have access to the scroll wheel assembly, and let's get a close-up of that. And as you can see, there's these little tabs holding the metal plate on the top. This is actually easy to remove. You just need to insert a screwdriver gently. Be careful not to scratch the main board. And you just need to pry these little tabs up. You only need to pry the front two, and it should just pop right off. Now, when it pops off, the center wheel is also going to come off. It's not a problem. Just be aware that it is spring-loaded, so when we remove it, it will pop off, and you may want to put your hand over it so that it doesn't get away from you. So now I'm going to remove the tab, and you can watch it just spring away. There it goes. Not a big deal. It's just two pieces, the metal top part and the round spinner section. Now we're looking at the inside of the unit. Here's the spring. This is the tensioner spring that allows the wheel to actually click. It clicks against it and also adds tension. These are the inside tracks that need to be cleaned, and we'll use some rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip to clean those up. Now while we're at this section, I want to just pause for a moment and talk about that spring. You can remove the spring to allow the wheel to spin more freely. However, what you lose is the clicking of the wheel, so it won't make that gradual click sound. It's helpful for accuracy. It's still just as accurate. It's just that for some people, having that click feedback is nice. If you remove the spring, you won't have that. Also, if you remove the spring, which I have done, and I've had to put it back, I can tell you that it's not an easy thing to get back on. It's not that it's incredibly difficult, it's just very, very small, and it's something that's very easy to lose, and it has a tendency to spring away from you very quickly when you're trying to work with it, especially when you have to work with tweezers on it. So I've tried, going forward a little bit, I've tried both with the spring and without, and I prefer to have the spring on because I found that it didn't really loosen up the tension that much. Now, each unit is different and each problem is different. You may find it preferable or necessary to remove the spring. It depends on what your particular problem is. Just keep in mind that you will lose the click, and its effect on the tension of the wheel may not be that great. Now I just want to mention also about the scroll wheel. Now that we've separated the top from the main board, you can freely move the scroll wheel, obviously, but it actually is in two pieces. If you remove the bottom section, this lays right on top of the top part of the scroll wheel, and this can separate from the actual wheel itself. So if you need to clean this up or whatnot, you can take it apart and clean it up. And as you can see, the 4 screws in there hold the buttons on. And also, underneath that wheel, it's important to remember this little flat plastic washer. Very hard to grab. And that goes on the bottom of the scroll wheel, and it allows it to slide freely without getting interference from those screws. Now, as I said before, the wheel on mine did not spin very freely, and although I've already, going forward a little bit, I've already cleaned this up, and I've tried removing the spring to loosen the tension. I've had little success, although when I reseated it, it did spin more freely. So it's important to set everything up and put it back together, and then try spinning the wheel a little bit before you fully assemble it. You'll have an opportunity to try that out a little bit. But the solution that worked best for me was to take a foot off of a laptop or whatever you have handy that fits well, and I glued it onto the top of the scroll wheel. This gave me a much easier ability to spin the wheel without putting a lot of pressure on the wheel. And I just have to say that worked extremely well, and I'll show you that a little later on in the video. But let's get back to the scroll wheel assembly itself. Okay, as I said before, when you remove the metal bracket on the top, you'll lose the top part of the scroll wheel. This is the top part of the scroll wheel. It has 3 prongs in the bottom that I'll show you closer in a moment, but it lies right in the trench, the circular trench, and then the metal bracket will go, once you have that perfectly centered, the metal bracket will lie right on top of that, and when you press down on the metal bracket, it will lock back into place. But first, let's take a look at that wheel a little bit closer. As you can see, there are 3 tabs. I'm going to get a close-up of this so you can see it very closely. There are 3 tabs that extend out from it. Let's get the focus working here. There we go. And as you can see, they should all be equally, basically the same height. If you've used yours for a while, you may find that some of these have bent down and you'll need to bend them back up. There's 2 little prongs on each one of these 3, and you want to get them all about the same height. Okay, so now I've gone ahead and I've cleaned up my scroll wheel a little bit. I've used some rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip to clean the area, and it's much cleaner now. And if you have a problem with your scroll wheel not responding properly or not being able to increment or decrement, chances are cleaning up this area here will probably resolve most of the issues that you encounter with that. So once you reassemble it, you should see a marked improvement in its ability to accurately scroll values up and down. So now I'm going to reassemble the scroll wheel. It's fairly straightforward. Once you've got everything cleaned up and your pins properly bent to the right even dimensions, you just place the wheel, the top of the scroll wheel, into the contact trench, as it were, and then gently align everything. Get a close-up of this. 1 second. There we go. Now this is fairly simple. You don't need any special tools. Just line it up, line up each one of the tabs, and once it's aligned, you just simply need to use your nail to press down, and it'll lock right into place, very simply. I'll click there, click there, and it will be as good as new. Now you can check it with the bottom half of the scroll wheel by placing it in there and turning it and making sure it's seated properly. Just make sure that all 4 clamps have locked into place, and it's pretty obvious when that's right. Now I'm going to begin to reassemble, so rather than drag the rubber bands off, I'm just simply going to cut them off so that I don't have to worry about possibly grabbing a wire by accident or something getting tangled. I'll just cut these, release it, and slide it out. It's best to check the ribbon cable and the power cable, make sure that nothing got dislodged during the cleanup phase. And from this point forward, just make sure to hold on to that screen. Also, this is a good opportunity to clean the inside of the glass panel and the top of the LCD screen for fingerprints and whatnot. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now everything's cleaned up and we're going to be reassembling the unit. We just lie it face up, and at this point we want to make sure that our scroll wheel assembly is reassembled on the top cover. So we need to put that back together. At this point, it's important to remember that you're going to need both this bottom section as well as the top section and the white washer. Don't forget the white washer, as it allows the wheel to spin very smoothly. Now, as you can see, you want to make sure that this is seated properly and that it spins well. This is your first opportunity to make sure that your scroll wheel is seated well and that everything spins. So take advantage of it now, because as you go further in, it's back to disassembly if something isn't seated right. Now there's a couple of different ways to put this back together. You can put the top cover, lay the unit out and put the top cover face down as I'm doing here, or you can put the PCB board face up and then put the cover on top of that. It all depends on the person and what works best for you. This way of doing it allows you to align the battery contacts a little easier and to make sure everything is seated properly. Make sure that the holes that hold the daughter board up are aligned properly, and also be very careful of the springs for the battery contacts to make sure they slide in properly. Take your time and don't force it. When it's right, it should just practically fall into place. The springs may need slight adjustments. Just remember, the top cover is going to be coming on as well, which is going to hold those springs in better. Okay, now I want to talk about this tab right here. On my unit, this just fell out. Now on some of your units, some of you out there may not have this problem, but just in case it happens to other people, I just want to show you how to get this tab back in. Unlike the other tabs, there's 4 tabs total. Unlike the other tabs on this unit that are attached to the PC board, right there and there and there, unlike those that are attached to the PC board, this one actually goes behind the battery terminal here. Okay, now there's a slot, and this will actually slide into that slot, but you don't want to do that. And the reason why is because if you slide that into the slot, you've got metal touching metal, and then you've got this bracket holds on the front plate and the back plate. So basically you're connecting the entire metal surface of this to the battery terminal. Not a good idea. And but
it's funny because that looks like it might be the way it goes. The way it actually goes is unlike the other tabs. For this particular one, I don't know if you can see it or not, there is a little plastic nub between the two holes right here and here. See the little plastic nub in the center? If you notice on the other side where these connect, this is for the other bracket, there is no little plastic nub. And that little plastic nub actually goes in the center of the bracket. Okay? And as you can see, this tab, the open end is up. See, there's an open end on this tab. I don't know if you can see that or not. There's an open end, and then there's a closed end. See, it's curved. It's a bent piece of metal and within one open end, and the way the opened end goes is like this. So it should be open and open. So that means if you're attaching it to this, we just go this way, it goes like that. Now, my guess is, and I'm about as sure as this as I can be, this was actually glued or pressed. The plastic was, heated or whatever and melted so that it held this unit on, or it was just glued on. I'm not sure which way they do it when they manufacture these sort of things. Okay, but I'm going to actually re-glue this so that it stays on. And I don't want to have to deal with that again. I just want this thing to stay together the way it should. And I just want to mention this, although these are secured to the PC board, this isn't really, this one isn't so much about holding the sides onto the unit. The sides actually have tabs up here. And when they're slid into place, when you put them in their 3 spots there and you put the top on the bottom on, this gets locked into place. Now it's screwed onto here, but that's mostly, this tab's purpose is mostly to connect the sides onto, or the top and the bottom on the metal plates onto the side. Okay, they're not so much for holding the side onto the unit. That's why they're not, this tab is not connected to anything here. It just kind of hangs out on this. Okay, so it's not anything to worry about. It's not going to affect, it's not going to be loose or anything. There are other mechanisms that hold everything in place. Okay, when you put it back together again, you'll know, you'll see. Okay, now like I said, some of you won't have this problem. Some of you probably take this off and it's all in one piece already. And if anybody can just verify that, that'd be great. But like I said, I'm 99% sure that's the way it's supposed to be.
Next, we're going to put the top of the scroll wheel on, and then just place it on, and make sure again that white washer is on it as well, so that it scrolls smoothly. And then you should be able to again check to make sure that it's spinning properly. Now, as you can see, this unit is still having a problem spinning freely. I subsequently opened this up and reseated everything, and then the wheel began to spin much more freely. So it's an important point to test your wheel now before you reassemble the whole unit and make sure that it's spinning and that everything's seated properly. Next, we're going to reattach the daughter board for the guitar/mic input. And it's very straightforward. Just drop it into place. It's best to plug it in before you screw it in. It's a lot easier to access the plug. Now, remember, the screws on the sides of the unit are short, and the screws on the rest of the unit on the back and on this particular daughter board are all long. There's only 2 types of screws, but it's important not to confuse the 2. The screw for the scroll wheel is also a long screw, just like the ones on the back and on the daughter board. Again, the side screws are shorter and should be kept separate. Next, we're going to put the 2 screws in the bottom of the main board. Again, on the main board, they're labeled A and B. Now, before you put the back on the unit, there's a couple of things you need to remember to do. Number 1 is to place the switch back on the micro switch. Make sure it's lined up at the very, very center opening. Just place it over it and give it a quick check.
So I've given that sufficient time to dry and cure, and now I'm just going to put it back on. And what you do is there are 3 tabs. They're along the bottom edge, and they go into these slots. Just want to tilt it slightly, line it up, and it just goes right over it. Do that, hold that with your pinky, and do the same thing on this side. Now remember, you're going to be putting it on upside down because the face is facing downward. Again, 3 slots, line them up. Okay. And then take the back cover, and when you put this on, you want to make sure that the slots also line up. And then with this closed, you should not be able to pull these off. They're locked into place.
So before we screw this all together, we're just going to double check the sides and make sure everything is lined up and it's properly inserted in the tabs and the slots in the side. You'll understand it when you see it. It's not very complicated. And then we'll just screw the bottom plate back on. Next, we're going to insert the batteries and just give it a test. It's a good time to test it before we install the side panels. So we'll just power it up and check the scroll wheel. Now I don't have the scroll wheel all the way screwed in yet. I didn't screw that in yet. So it's a little loose here, and as I said earlier, this needed to be reseated. So I did actually reseat it again, and it scrolled even better than it is now, which is not too great. But the ultimate solution for me was to, again, attach a foot from a laptop or some other device. And I basically glued that onto the top of this, and it made it scroll very, very well. In addition to reseating it, which I'm not showing in this video, but I did actually open it up, just reseat everything, and it scrolled much smoother. Next, we're going to reattach the scroll wheel by inserting the last remaining long screw into the back of the unit. Now you need to do this now before you put the back panel on, because the metal panel will cover the screw hole that is used to attach the scroll wheel. So we can put the front panel on, but the back panel needs to stay off until we put the scroll wheel on. So again, we when reassembling, you have to make sure that everything slides into its proper slots. You need to put a little pressure on it to get both sides in and that tab. It's a little bit of a pain, but it does make for a nice finished look. And then once you have the top cover in place, it's time to put the scroll wheel back on. So we'll put the scroll wheel on the top. Right there. And then insert the screw into the hole next to the switch, as indicated right here in the diagram. The blue circle is where you insert the screw, and with the scroll wheel on the other side, don't forget the white washer, tighten it up, and you'll be all set. Once you've tightened the screw for the scroll wheel, you can put the back panel on. Remember to insert the tabs into the slots. On both sides. And again, this may take a little bit of effort to get them to, especially the last tab, to get that last tab to pop into place. You may find that if you start from one side or the other, it might be easier. But again, it's not too hard. You just gotta line everything up and then just check it and see. One side goes in, the other side goes out. So try it again. And that last one usually takes a little bit of effort. And then just check both sides, and then you can go ahead and screw in your last remaining 8 screws. And these 8 screws should be the smaller ones. And with that done, you've reassembled it. Well, I hope that's helped some of you resolve some of your issues with the scroll wheel, and I do recommend trying the idea with super gluing a foot off of a laptop or whatnot onto the top of the scroll wheel. You will find that it works much better. It spins much easier. I plan to show another video with that completed. I just didn't have time to put it on here, but I can tell you it worked really, really well. The only downside to adding a foot, as it were, onto the top of the scroll wheel to make it really feel like a jog dial and work like a jog dial is that the jog dial now is slightly above the face of the unit, which is more likely to catch on your pocket or your bag, or pocket of your bag rather, when you're putting it away. That's probably the only downside I can see to it. So it doesn't have that smooth top profile. Beyond that, I've done it on my unit and I couldn't be happier with it. So in any case, by cleaning these the tabs and the inside of the jog dial, you should resolve most of your issues, or any issues that you have with the accuracy of the jog dial being wrong, you know, where you're scrolling up and it's jumping back and forth between numbers. All that should be resolved once you've cleaned up the jog dial. All right, well, I hope that helped you guys out, and see you next time. Hey, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Appreciate it. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them below, and I will try to answer them as soon as I can. Thanks a lot, and please, if you have time, check out my other videos. Take care. Later.